everyone, and welcome to the Student Zone at Microsoft Build. My name is April, and I am a Senior Cloud Advocate here at Microsoft. I focus on augmented reality and mixed reality, and I just love all the different ways that you can apply this technology both today as well as in the future. We've had a really great time so far here in the Student Zone. You've had a chance to meet some very inspiring students. We've also had some intros to Visual Studio Code and GitHub and Python, as well as AI and bots. So for this session, we have a very special guest with us. But before we begin, please refer to the Microsoft Digital Code of Conduct within the chat, and remember to be kind as well to everyone. Also, as we head towards a little bit later in the session, we will have a Q&A with our guests, so be sure to submit your questions there too. So as for our session, joining me today will be Sarah Guthels, she is one of my teammates, and then joining us, we have a very special guest who is literally out of this world. Dr. Love is a NASA astronaut who flew to space aboard the shuttle Atlantis for the mission STS-122. And so we'll chat a bit more about that in a bit. However, in addition to being an astronaut, Dr. Love has fulfilled some very interesting roles with NASA. But Dr. Love didn't necessarily start his career at NASA. He was actually a programming instructor, and he was also an assistant in physics and chemistry laboratories at the University of Oregon in Eugene. So we're going to start our conversation there. But before we do that, Dr. Love, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I am doing all right. So I want to know, what is your favorite programming language? And most important, why is it Python? Just kidding, that's mine. But what about you? What's your favorite programming language?
So my favorite is C. That kind of dates me. I learned in BASIC, and I am just barely young enough to have avoided punch cards.
I've seen those.
And you don't want to see them again. There's a reason they're obsolete.
Well, that's really cool. So given your background, you seem to have pretty much spanned the entire STEM spectrum. What sparked your interest in science and technology?
Oh, that's a hard one to answer. You know, all kids are interested in space and dinosaurs. I was too. Also, my mother is a botanist, so she was always teaching us about plants and animals. She taught college biology for many years. And science, all kinds of science and technology have always been interesting to me. I consumed as much science fiction as I could get my hands on when I was a kid, and I've built my whole career around science and engineering.
Oh, that's pretty cool. So a lot of life sciences, I would say botany is super cool. I can definitely attest to that because I love anything plants and flowers and trees. So throughout your career, you've had a chance to participate in missions and expeditions underwater, on land, and even in space. And those are all three very different environments. What I'm going to do is start with underwater, and then we'll work our way up to space. So is that all right with you?
Let's do it.
All right, perfect. So starting with underwater, in British Columbia, you piloted the deep worker submersibles for the Pavilion Lake Research Project. What exactly is a submersible?
A submersible is a miniature submarine. The distinction usually is if it's a submarine, if it's sort of long and has an aerodynamic shape. It's a submersible if it can move up and down and sideways and has like a little robot arm on it and that sort of thing. So we were using little one-person submersibles, even smaller than one of those smart cars. And you sort of get sealed into this, and a crane would put you in the water, and then the machine was in its element, and you could kind of tootle around and go up and down and sideways. And in Pavilion Lake, which is this amazing mountain lake up in the Canadian Coast Ranges, which has these weird growths in it that look like coral but aren't. And the lake is about 200 feet deep. So we were going very deep where things start to get a little bit dark, and looking at these amazing coral growths.
Oh, wow. So you're very, very deep underwater.
Yes.
It gets very dark. How do you even prepare for that?
Like we prepare for everything else at NASA, and that kind of activity outside of NASA and around the world is training. So we
Yeah.
had about a week of training in how to use the submersible, how all the systems worked, how to pilot it, what to do if there was an emergency, and then that capped off with a day of driving the submersible around in the bay. Now, in a car or
Mhm.
an airplane, there's usually another seat for an instructor, but in the submersible, you are all by yourself. So you do your
Yeah.
book learning, and then they dump you in the bay and you figure it out.
Oh, wow. And so, what exactly is it that makes Pavilion Lake so special? Because we have a million lakes, I feel like, on in this planet, but why Pavilion Lake?
So it's these coral-like growths. They're just not seen anywhere else in the world, and there are only a couple of other lakes in that area that
Mhm.
have things like it. But Pavilion Lake is the best. It's like an amazing coral reef underwater, but without all the colorful fish and things. And these structures are actually built not by polyps, which are like small jelly-like animals, but instead
Mhm.
by microbes. And in that
Oh,
regard, they're like stromatolites, which are these
yeah.
sort of microbe structures that were the first sort of macroscopic evidence of life that we had on Earth 3 billion years ago. And you can still see
Mhm.
things like that in Australia as well.
Oh, wow. And so, if I'm not mistaken, they're microbialites. Is that correct?
That is the correct word.
Okay, perfect. And so, what can we learn from those then exactly?
So, what we're trying to learn from those is more about the earliest origins of life on Earth. Really, these stromatolite structures are some of the earliest fossils that we have. Um, and so, if we're searching out in space for life as on Earth, it's likely that we might encounter something like those stromatolites. So what we were doing in Pavilion Lake, besides just studying the biology and geology and hydrology of the lake and the structures in it, we were also practicing as if we were exploring, say, the ocean under the ice crust of Europa or Enceladus,
Oh.
um,
Mhm.
with a distant mission control and delayed communications and all that, and seeing
Yeah.
how we would conduct science that way, especially when you have only one person in the submersible and their brain is mostly full of submersible, and they may not have a lot of extra brain power for doing the biology, geology, hydrology, and all those brains
Yeah.
are separate in mission control.
Oh, wow. Okay. Way more than what I thought we could learn from them. So that's
No,
really
it's
cool.
amazing. So not just the science, but also how we will operate when
Yeah.
looking for ancient life on other worlds.
Yeah. So it's pretty much as though you all essentially did like a simulation, even though you actually were also underwater as well. And I saw that as a couple years later, you were also a submersible pilot for the 16th NASA Extreme Environment Missions Operations Test. Could you tell me a bit more about that?
So that was also sort of a simulated science expedition underwater. Only this case, it was off of Key Largo, Florida, so the water was nice and warm, and it
Yeah.
wasn't quite as deep. And in Nemo 16, we had a crew of astronauts and technicians living in an undersea habitat, 40 feet
Mm.
down, with a wet porch. So the inside was pressurized so that there was a room in the habitat with a floor
Oh my
that was
goodness.
water. You just suit up and step
Yeah.
into the pool, and you're swimming 40 feet deep. We also had the submersibles, though, and in that case, we were working out how suited astronauts might cooperate with small piloted space vehicles to set up big, heavy science instruments in a weightless environment or build structures in a weightless environment. So
Yeah.
we were also studying the operations there, but also the crews and for at least one of the submersible dives, we're doing science on the coral reef, understanding how the sponges grow and changes in the reef over time.
Oh, wow. When you say that you were living underwater, reminds me of Atlantis almost, because it's like you have this entire underwater, well, granted, it was like a society with Atlantis, but that's really cool, actually. I didn't even imagine that that was going on. And so I know we haven't talked about space yet. I'll get to that in a bit for everyone at home. However, how would you say that experience being underwater compares to your experience being in space? How's it the same? I mean, I know it's different, but like how so would you say beyond the obvious that one's in the sky and one's underwater?
Well, the underwater simulations are some of the best ones we have for the whole picture of space operations. And the two key things are simulated weightlessness. That is, if you're underwater and you're weighed out properly, you float as if you were in space. Now, you still feel gravity, but it doesn't make you fall or rise. And then, of course, the outside environment that does not support human life is a big part of being underwater, and it's a big part of being in space. So your equipment is vital to your continued survival. It's very important to check your equipment, to have plans in place in case there's an equipment malfunction. And that kind of attention and awareness of the danger of your environment and the criticality of your equipment is central to both underwater and space. And so it's really one of our very best ways of preparing people on Earth for working and living in space.
Okay, and so explain something to me, because I think I'm processing it in my head. When I'm in the water, if I just stepped into a lake, I'm going to the bottom. So if you have really large objects, no, I'm not. So
no, you're not.
Tell me what's happening. Tell me what's happening.
Well, you're made mostly out of water. So if you step into a lake, if you step from a height, of course, you will sink down a little bit. But if you've got some air in your lungs, you will sort of barely float near the surface. And the amount of air in your lungs can be compensated for with a couple of small weights like lead or steel weights. And then you would really be neutral in buoyancy. You would neither rise nor sink. But human body's mostly water, and we tend to be pretty close to neutrally buoyant in water regardless.
Oh, okay. Good to know. I got to jump in the pool and see what happens. Next time I go somewhere. What'd you say? I'm sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, sure. Give it a try.
I'm going to
space and real weightlessness is like being underwater in a pool, except it's warm and you can do a somersault without getting water up your nose.
That's a good thing to know. I got to try that out this summer. And so I am going to now go to land. And so you spent some time in Antarctica as part of 2 Antarctic search for meteorite expeditions. And what did those expeditions entail exactly?
Okay, so Antarctica is a tough place to be, and the Meteorite group goes down there almost every year. We've been curtailed with the COVID pandemic last year and probably this coming season as well. But we send a team of 6 to 8 people out onto the high ice cap of Antarctica, 8,000 feet above sea level, 200 miles from the nearest human habitation, which is the South Pole Station in most cases. There is nothing living out there except us and our gut flora. And we go to these special places where the wind is actively ablating the ice away and leaving ancient ice that's been buried for hundreds of thousands of years and contains all the meteorites that section of Antarctica has collected over all that time. And there's places you can drive around on a snowmobile, and every rock you see could only have fallen from the sky because the only Earth rocks are underneath a mile of ice. So we're living in 2-person tents. We have a little stove for warmth. We have a lot of warm clothes. We have a snowmobile for each person. And each day we eat breakfast, put on all our warm clothes, get out on our snow machines, and get out into this very cold, about 0 degrees Fahrenheit, wind chills down to -40, constant sunlight because it's southern summer when we're below the Antarctic Circle. And we are looking for rocks from space. And we don't try to do any science on them because it's uncomfortable there. We just give that thing a number, put it in a bag, and somebody in a nice warm laboratory can figure out where it came from. And so we spent 6 weeks out there. 6 weeks. It's like an ultra camping experience, and then we come on back.
So then what do you all actually look for in the rocks? Because are you just picking up any rock and putting it in the bag and tagging it? Or there has to be something special about the rock to decide to bring it back to do more research?
So good point. And there are a lot of terrestrial rocks on the ice in Antarctica, but and we try not to bring home any of those because they're not worth much for us. But that is actually probably the greatest scientific conundrum of collecting meteorites is it a meteorite? Most meteorites are magnetic, so we bring a little magnet with us and we can see if it sticks the magnet, but some Earth rocks are too, and some meteorites aren't. And the best diagnostic, though, is called fusion crust. So in its brief passage through the Earth's atmosphere, meteorites get scorched like you were hitting them with a blowtorch for 5 or 10 seconds, and they get a sort of a black, shiny, glassy layer on the outside. And if a rock has that, it is almost certainly a meteorite. And but I've been outside in Antarctica in the cold wind while 4 meteorite experts argued about whether or not this rock should be collected and whether it's a meteorite or not. So it's hard even for the experts.
Oh, wow. And so I feel like I want to go take a magnet and go put it up to all the rocks now to see if it happens to
Well,
be a meteorite.
we have a term, meteor wrong, for
You're wrong.
rocks that have been identified falsely as meteorites. And
Aw.
frankly, unless you're in a place that is thick with meteorites like the Antarctic ice cap in these certain specific places, the odds that a random rock you pick up are a meteorite are extremely remote.
Okay, so not here in Los Angeles then.
Probably a meteor rock or a piece of slag iron or bog iron. There's all sorts of weird things that masquerade as meteorites that aren't.
Oh, okay. Wishful thinking. And so you've also spent some time in the desert and you were driving a rover as well for another simulation. What was the purpose of that particular simulation?
So that one was to practice doing geology on the moon using a
Okay.
rover where you would drive to an interesting geologic site, put on your spacesuit, get out, describe what you see, take some samples.
Mhm.
And in this particular exercise, we also had a science center with a lot of very smart geologists communicating with us remotely, and we would dial in various communication delays depending on if we were on the moon or pretending to be on Mars. The rover systems, we were testing how pleasant is it to live in this rover for a week? Answer, depends sensitively on how good the toilet is.
Oh, my
Uh,
ass.
yeah, all right, I brought it up, my fault. But anyway, and we were also in this one, it wasn't quite as scripted as some of our other simulation exercises. We gave the professional geologist in the field, each of whom was paired up with an astronaut whose main job was to drive the rover. We would give
Mhm.
the geologist in the field some leeway to look around, see something that maybe wasn't expected, and then investigate that. That was very hard to do on the Apollo lunar EVAs, even when we had a geologist up there, because everything was very tightly scripted, and their chance to sort of explore around, which is a key part of field science. You know, you're out there looking for thing A, and then you notice
Mhm.
something weird. The ability to
Yeah.
go and look at that weird thing and maybe learn something you had no idea even to look for, and that might be the breakthrough discovery of the mission. So we had a little bit more latitude to do that on the Desert Rats rover driving mission.
Okay, so it's kind of like you're looking for the unknown. It's kind of like you don't know until it just pops up, right? Almost more or less.
That's how science works.
Yeah, that is a very good point. That's exactly how science works. And so I'm going to transition to space, as I'm
Okay.
sure there's a lot of questions with regards to space. I know I'm a fanatic. Obviously, I dress to match you because I love what you all do at NASA. But in '98, you were selected as a NASA astronaut. And before I get into the specifics, just what was going through your head at that point?
Well, I was very excited. Being an astronaut had been a lifetime dream of mine when I was 6 years old and the Apollo missions were going to the moon. I had a Apollo mission steel lunchbox. My little lunch pail had rockets on it.
Aw.
And so I was thrilled. It was a lifetime dream. But at the same time, I had a young family. My
Mhm.
wife was worried about me getting blown up. Neither of us were
Oh,
super excited about moving to Houston.
yeah. Aw.
I was a West Coast boy and enjoyed the trees and the mountains and so on. And I don't have so many of those opportunities here in Houston. And then, of course, worried about getting blown up at some point, but if it is
Yeah.
a job.
Yeah. Well, I can understand that definitely. And so preparing for becoming an astronaut and going to space isn't something that you do for like a 1 week training. This takes a bit of time, right?
Oh yeah. So the basic training when you walk in the door as a new astronaut until you're considered eligible to assign to a space flight is about 2 years long. They
Okay.
put you through survival training. They teach you how to be a rear seat crew member in an aircraft if you're not already a jet pilot. Um, you have to learn all the systems on board the vehicles that you're going to be flying on and how to operate
Yeah.
them and what to do in emergencies. They even give you a little bit of charm school training for talking to the public if you're not used to that. I had some teaching experience when I walked in the door, and that helped immensely there.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's just a very wide range of basic training, but especially focused on the technology you're going to be using on your vehicle and then what to do when things go wrong, because that
Yeah.
is that is where we find out if you were really a good crew member or not, is how you handle yourself in an emergency, how you handle the
Yeah.
systems that are important for your safety, how you handle those in an emergency. And that's really the focus of what we do to prepare to go into space.
Okay, that's clear. And speaking of all the crew members, if I'm not mistaken, there were 7 of you, including yourself. Is that correct?
That's correct. Although asterisk fine print, the 7 who launched were not the 7 who landed. Our mission dropped off a crew member at the International Space Station, and then we brought home a station crew member who'd been up there for several months.
Okay, all right. And so what all did everyone do? Because I'm sure you all didn't just go to space and you all did the same one task. What were the different roles that everyone played?
So teamwork at NASA is the most important factor. And we do a lot of things, and teamwork still comes out on top. So we had a commander and pilot whose job it was to fly the orbiter, the space shuttle, get it safely into orbit, get it safely docked to the space station, and then get it undocked and safely re-enter the atmosphere and land on the runway back in Florida. We had a couple of flight engineers up on the flight deck whose main job was to help the pilot and commander operate the vehicle. The shuttle was very complicated. That cockpit had over 1,000 switches and circuit breakers in it, and the flight engineers need to know what every single one of those does. And then we had a couple of robot arm operators. That was one of my jobs, to operate both the space shuttle robot arm and the space station robot arm, which functioned as the crane we used to take our payload, which was a laboratory module about the size of a bus, and pull that out of the shuttle's payload bay and then get it attached to the space station to be a new laboratory module for the station. And then we also had the shuttle's robot arm, and the main job of that was to pick up a 50-foot long boom with a bunch of sensors and cameras on the end of it, and sweep it across our thermal control system to make sure that we didn't have any breaches in our heat shield getting ready for entry. Then we had 3 spacewalkers on the crew, and I was one of those 3. And their job was to go out. We did 3 EVAs, of which I did 2. And the first of those was to prepare that laboratory module to be installed on the space station. And then the second 2 were to outfit some some science instruments on the outside of that lab, and then to do some maintenance and repair work on the space station while we were there. And everybody knew their roles, and most people were cross-trained to fill in for their buddy if their buddy was not feeling well or something like that. And we had to function like a well-oiled machine, but we had about 2 years to get that ready. And we also had to function like a well-oiled machine with the space station crew, whom we did not have the opportunity to train with directly very much.
Oh, wow. A lot of teamwork. I can definitely understand that. Even just working like in tech in general, there's a lot of teamwork to help make things come to fruition. And so I'm going to have 2 more questions before we head to our Q&A. So for everyone that's tuning in, definitely be sure to submit any additional questions that you have. But first thing though, Dr. Love, so you co-created something very cool with another astronaut, Ed Liu, and that is a gravity tractor. Can you tell us what a gravity tractor does?
Sure. So one of the things that both Ed and I have been interested in, and Ed is actually making a career out of it now, is what we would do to protect the Earth from an asteroid that might hit it. And there are many proposed ways of deflecting an incoming asteroid, provided you have enough warning time. And many of them are kind of kludgy, and if the asteroid is rough or irregular, or basically a pile of sand and gravel barely held together with its own gravity and spinning and maybe in a chaotic rotation state, most of these methods don't work. Ed and I, who had to drive past the Apollo tractor rocket, which was a little rocket attached to the Apollo capsule to drag it away from the booster in case the booster had a problem. And we thought, maybe we could do that with asteroids. So the gravity tractor, you send a spacecraft over to your threatening asteroid, you position yourself near it, and you just hover there. And over time, very gradually, the gravitational pull of the spacecraft will pull the asteroid onto a new orbit, and you can control this with exquisite sensitivity and make sure that that new orbit will take it past the Earth instead of at the Earth 10 years or so later when the encounter would occur.
I've heard recently that there was some space material that was coming to the Earth, but it sounds like for what you created, it definitely helps with ensuring that asteroids don't just fall down from the sky, because that would be scary.
Well, we got to find them all first. That's the
Yeah,
rub,
that too.
and we're searching as hard as we can, but it's
Yeah.
still not out of the question that a good-sized asteroid could appear in our surveys
Hmm.
days to hours before it hits, which is way, way too short. You need at
Yeah.
least a decade to mount a deflection mission that used another method, such as collision with a spacecraft or lighting off a nuclear weapon next to the asteroid.
Yeah.
And you need about 20 years of lead time for the gravity tractor. The good news is once we've found an asteroid, we can plot its orbit and know where it's going for the next 100 years. And of the
Okay.
thousands of asteroids we've found that cross the Earth's orbit, we have so far found none that are on a collision course.
Okay, that is good news. So I have one final question, and then we'll head over to the Q&A, and that is for those of us who are watching that want to prepare, or the students, I guess, that want to prepare for a career in space exploration. So whether that's an astronaut or actually, honestly, any other roles that you mentioned that other folks play here at play with you all at NASA, what would you advise them, or what sort of advice would you have for them?
All right, so first of all, if you are hearing my voice, you're interested in computers and coding, and NASA loves coders. Everything we do, including the thousands of jobs we have on the ground in mission control, engineering, coding is central to all that. Simulation, mission simulation, all coding. So you are already in the right place. And when you're done with college, we hope you'll send us a job application because we like you already. Being an astronaut's a little tougher. I had a coding background, and things like logic and understanding how machines decide what state they're in. That is important, but it is not everything. And in particular, being an astronaut is physically very demanding. Doing a spacewalk is incredibly tough. It's not quite as bad as running a marathon, but it's up there. And so you need to be physically very fit. And have some, let's say, experience in dangerous environments. If all you've done
Yeah.
is sit in front of a desk, you may not be ready to get into a high performance jet and go upside down at Mach 1. So things like sailing, rock climbing, scuba diving, flying an airplane, activities where your equipment is important, where there's an element of risk, where technical competence is central, and then of course teamwork, teamwork, teamwork. That's what we were
Yes.
looking for in our astronaut applicants.
Yes, that is so good to know. And I hope for those of you who are tuning in, something has inspired you to pursue one of these careers, which is really great. So if it's okay with you, Dr. Love, I have some questions from the audience, starting off with Isa. What are your predictions when we'll be able to travel to the moon as tourists?
As tourists,
Yeah, I know.
well, first we got to get back to having a few astronauts on the moon. So prediction is difficult, particularly about the future. But I would suggest looking at Antarctica as an analog. Okay, the first missions to sort of tag the South Pole were in 1911, 1912. The International Geophysical Year, when countries started setting up permanent bases in Antarctica, was about 1957. So 40 or 50 years after the TAG mission, we started putting in bases, and we're working on that part of this equation right now here at NASA. We're going to get some new crew members on the moon as soon as we can in the next handfuls of years, and then as soon as we can do it regularly, we'll start building up infrastructure and a base. Tourist ships to Antarctica, where they kind of go along the coastline and you might get to go touch an island and take a picture of a penguin.
Yeah.
Those started being big maybe 10 or 20 years ago. So another 30 years or so after there was permanent infrastructure, we started seeing tourist expeditions near Antarctica. And we still don't have a lot of tourists going to the South Pole Station itself. It's expensive, and the accommodations are not what rich travelers are used to.
Yeah, I was going to say, given the cost, I can imagine that. And so I have another good question here, which is, can you give us, this is from Demir, can you give us a taste of protocol for eventual first contact with intelligence other than humans? So not artificial intelligence like AI, of course, but other intelligence.
So you're asking the wrong guy. I'm an astronomer. I would start reading science fiction novels, honestly, because they put a lot more thought into most people. This is a topic of a lot of interest to a lot of folks, but right now we've got no data. And let me present a cautionary tale. Um, there are entities on Earth that we think are kind of intelligent, like orangutans and dolphins. And we cannot communicate with them at all, even though with the orangutans, we share like 98% of our DNA with them, right? And dolphins are mammals like we are. Now, imagine an animal that is so different from us that, I mean, really different, shares none of its DNA. And that means like weirder than a sea cucumber, weirder than a cauliflower.
Yeah.
Explain to me how we're going to understand and speak to that. It may not even use sound to communicate. So good luck. But where I would start is with scientific concepts. If we contact aliens, the overwhelmingly likely thing is that we will see signals from them before we see their ships, because sending a signal among stars, we can do that already. Sending a ship among the stars takes hundreds of thousands of times more energy than the entire world now produces to send one ship to another star, and it will still take 40 years. So signals travel easily. People and things travel with difficulty. So start thinking about signals, and I expect that we would start with mathematical concepts, sending, beeps in the numbers of the prime numbers. There's nothing in nature that communicates in prime numbers. That's a sign of intelligence. And again, coding, math, logic, these are the fields that will certainly be used to understand those first signals.
Okay, and then speaking of programming, so we have another question. This one's from Vishal. Which programming language is used very intensely in scientific research centers like NASA, CERN, Fermilab, etc.? So which programming language would you say is used mostly?
I have no idea. I haven't gotten paid to program since I was a postdoc. And so the language I was programming in when I was hired as an astronaut was MATLAB. And before that, it was C and Fortran. I did most of my science work back in Fortran days. So what the cutting edge researchers right now are using, I do not know. And even then, at places like CERN, that was particle physics. I'm not smart on particle physics, so I don't know what they use.
That's completely fair. And the thing about programming, it seems as though so much changes every so often. At one point, there's a lot of folks using one language and then it switches to another. So completely fair.
Well, the good news is there are similarities, right? Once you know one and understand logic and variables and that sort of thing, it's very easy to pick up another programming language. And so I think once you have that skill, when you walk in the door at a new job and they're using a different platform, you can come up to speed pretty quick. It's a great skill to have.
Okay. And then we have another question. This one's from Kelly, and it's the age-old question. How do you get the public to understand the value of exploration? And it says that it seems like it's hard to get NASA enough funding and attention, but the work is incredibly important.
So part of the solution is why I am talking to you today. We take NASA folks, astronauts and others who are passionate about their work, interested in communicating it to the public, and they work hard to get us into forums just like this, where we can share what we're doing and not just, be a robotic face talking in technical terms, but you can see and hear the excitement in these folks' voices about what they do, why it's so interesting, why it's so cool. And to me, that goes a long ways toward doing this. Of course, having strong representation in Washington, D.C. And I should point out that despite all the political acrimony we've had over the last year, support for space exploration is strong on both sides of the aisle. Everybody agrees this is a good thing, even in times when they cannot agree on anything else. And that warms my heart.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I 100% support space exploration. I think it's really important. And so, trying to see if we have any more questions before we transition. Here's an interesting one. How does it feel inside an astronaut suit? And that came from Abhishek.
So suits, we have two kinds that I used. The orange, what we call the pumpkin suit. That is what we wear for launching and landing in a spacecraft. And that is basically your backup spacecraft in case your primary spacecraft gets a hole in it. And so it's got a helmet, it's airtight, but heaven help you, if your spacecraft depressurizes and you're in your suit, it will hold air, it will keep you alive, but it's as stiff as a board. You can barely move your arm. It just takes more force than you have to say, put your elbow up by your ear, and you can barely close your hand around a control. The big white suit that we use for spacewalks is a different beast. It's designed to allow us to do some work outside in that weightless environment. In the training pool, everybody comes out of that thing bruised, and a few people come out of it bloody because it's hard and gravity's pushing you into it in various directions depending on what your body orientation is in the pool. In space, it's much better. You just sort of float in the middle of it and all those forces equalize out. But even then, it's tiring. Every time you close your hand, it's like squeezing a tennis ball. So every time you move to a new handrail, every time you grab a tool to do something, it's hard work on your hands, and there is a lot of improvements, let's just say, able to be made in spacesuits so that they become habitable and then hopefully someday in the future even comfortable.
Yeah, hopefully so. Well, Dr. Love, I really appreciate your conversation with us today. I can completely say I've learned a lot about all the different missions that NASA is completing and continues to work on. I will have to transition things over to Sarah, as she has some really cool space-related content that she wants to share with you all at home. That's on Microsoft Learn. Before you head out, though, Dr. Love, do you have anything else you want to share with everyone?
Just that, as I mentioned before, if you want a career in space, first of all, I completely encourage it. It's a blast. You're doing cool stuff. You will never be bored, and you are in the right place. So congratulations, and send us a resume sometime, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Love. Appreciate it. And now, Sarah, go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. I don't know how I'm going to follow that up. That was absolutely amazing. I loved hearing that conversation. So thank you both. I did want to share with you some work that we've been doing. We've been lucky enough to chat not only with incredible people like Dr. Love, but also a lot of the other scientists who continue to do research as part of NASA. And as a result of that, we've created a number of learning paths centered around all of this NASA content, all of the challenges similar to what Dr. Love was just telling us about. In fact, one of the ones that he was mentioning was around space rocks and his mission in Antarctica. And we happen to have a whole lesson around that. From that same page, we're going to link that into the chat, where we talk about space rocks on planet Earth, and specifically that finding them in Antarctica is a really great place to find them, that it is definitely possible that they're in your backyard, but the likelihood of you finding them there and knowing that it's a space rock and not an Earth rock is fairly small. So that's one of the reasons. So if you want to learn more about kind of the behind the scenes or the reasons why certain choices were made through all of this scientific research at NASA, I highly recommend that you check out some of these modules. And if you are newer to coding, if you're just starting to get into development, I really wanted to highlight this particular learning path that we've launched and have recently transitioned to using interactive notebooks all within the browser on Microsoft Learn. So even if you are on a device where you can't install something or you don't want to deal with installing an entire development environment, you can actually learn to code all within this browser and all space themed. So this learning path in particular has a number of modules that walk you through the basics of Python. So I wanted to just show you this really quickly to show you that it's real. It's all just within the browser. This first module is just kind of introducing you to creating a variable, how comments work, etc. And this one is introducing you to code control statements. So that's like conditional statements like if statements or loops. And this one, we are actually bringing all of the things that you learn in those first two to just write a very simple application where you count the number of moon rocks in like a file of some sort. So I can show you this really quickly. You can see that there's an introduction. And when we jump right here into this exercise, this is the really neat thing. This is brand new. The content has been here for a while. You might have seen it in the past, but the fact that you can run all of this right inside your browser is just absolutely amazing. We give you the option to use the integrated Python notebooks in Visual Studio Code. We have a whole module on how to set that up. But if you're not ready to set that up quite yet and you just want to try out learning to code, you can just kind of skip over this first part right here and you can just start running code. So you just click on run. It asks you to activate a sandbox, which is completely free. All you need to be is logged into Microsoft Learn. You say, yes, please activate my sandbox. That's going to be happening right here above. You can see that I have 10 sandboxes that I can use today and that I can use 2 hours worth of sandboxes. That's a lot. Sandboxes are not just used for these integrated notebooks, but also for a ton of other modules. So be sure to browse through Microsoft Learn. Since the sandbox is activated now, I can actually run this code and it will start running. Now, this is an in-browser sandbox, so the first time you're running something, it needs to kind of get through and connect. But you can see right here, I've got this code, and I can just change this if I wanted to, and change this instead to, hello, Dr. Love. Thank you for your chat today. And I can rerun this, and there you go. It just prints right there. So if you want to learn to code, if you want to get introduced to the AI and machine learning and just general code behind some of the NASA, exploration, scientific discoveries, etc. We did actually get a chance to interview folks who really do this. This is not exactly how they do it for real. It is more of an introduction into this, but you should check this out because this is a great place to start developing those coding skills and potentially be a part of another space mission. I would also love to do that. A couple of years ago, I very tempted to apply, but similar to what Dr. Love was saying, at the time, my family lived on the West Coast. I had just had a child, and I wasn't quite ready to make the move to Texas and try for that, even if I did get it, which, that's a long shot in and of itself. But I highly encourage you all to give it a try, and who knows, maybe I'll give it a try again. So make sure to check out all of those Learn modules, and if you want to learn more, we have a ton of resources. We're going to be putting these resources in the chat, so make sure to check them out. They're also on the session page. So we've got that Learn module. We have all of the Learn paths that are inspired by space exploration. And if you haven't seen it already, we do have a GitHub repository with all of the resources for this session, as well as every other session in the Student Zone. So you should check out that GitHub repository also. And for everything that we point to on Microsoft Learn, we have an entire Learn collection. So instead of going and finding each individual Learn module, you can actually just check out this Learn collection. All right, so the last thing, well, two last things really quickly. One is that there is a Cloud Skills Challenge also that you should definitely check out. And that is, there's a few of them, one of them specifically for novice developers. And in just 15 minutes, our next session is all around our partnership with Space Jam, A New Legacy, where my friend Cecil is doing an interview with a special effects supervisor. It's gonna be amazing. We also have a sneak peek to a bunch of brand new modules coming out. So you should definitely stick around. Maybe stretch a little, get some water, but otherwise I'll see you in just a few minutes. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you again to April and to Dr. Love. It was an incredible conversation, very inspiring. And I think I might have to go look at what possible ways I might be able to work with NASA in the future soon here. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great rest of build. Bye.